Tonight, we turn not to the skies, but to the deep, the oceans. Are they simply filled with water, or could they be hiding something much stranger? What are your thoughts? Share them in the comments below. This is part of the Unknown series, where we explore mysteries that do not have easy answers, from the skies above to the waters down below. Before we begin, if the secrets of the deep keep you curious, make sure to like and subscribe so you will not miss the next encounter. Now, let us start beneath the surface. Most of our planet is covered in water, and most of that water hides a darkness no human eye has ever seen. We have mapped Mars more clearly than we have mapped our own ocean floor. Yet, for more than 100 years, people who work at sea and in the skies have reported something very strange. Objects moving beneath the waves with a speed and precision that no known vessel should be able to perform. These reports are not rare. They have shown up in ship journals, radar logs, and even in official government records, sometimes hidden for years before finally being revealed. And among those who have seen these things, there is one name spoken quietly: USOs, or Unidentified Submerged Objects. Unlike UFOs, these are not distant lights flashing in the sky. These appear to be vehicles, or something like vehicles, operating in a place where such movement should be impossible. They move at depths where the pressure would crush steel, and yet they seem to move without any struggle. They speed up faster than submarines, turn sharply without slowing down, and sometimes rise from the depth to pass effortlessly into the air above. Some make no sound at all and are only noticed when sonar suddenly breaks. Others glow with a pale light, shining for miles across the dark sea. Whatever these things may be, they do not act like human-made machines. And this is not a new mystery. From old naval reports in the 1900s to Cold War missions and incidents only recently declassified, the pattern stays the same. Our oceans could be hiding something we still do not fully understand. These are not just wild stories. They are real events that made Navy forces respond. One of the first reports came over 100 years ago, when a steamship near Africa witnessed something no one could explain. In the early morning of September 1902, the British steamship Fort Salisbury was crossing the Atlantic near the coast of West Africa. The journey had been calm, the air thick but still. The sea was low with nothing unusual. It was the kind of night ship officers liked. Steady travel without surprises. An officer stood on watch at the bridge while far up on the bow, a lookout kept his eyes on the dark horizon. The watch was quiet, the kind of slow stretch where every minute felt longer than the last. Then, just after 3 a.m., something broke the silence. The lookout shouted. 2 steady lights were ahead, low on the water. The officer grabbed his glass and looked closely. These were not stars. They were not the flickering lights of another ship's lanterns. These lights were still, holding their place. They looked like the beams of a large ship, but something was clearly wrong. There was no shape of masts or smokestacks, no sound of engines carried across the water. There was no sound but the soft splash of the sea itself. Nothing moved across the horizon, except for the slow and natural rise and fall of the ocean. The officer kept studying the scene. The lights were still in place. The way they were positioned made it feel like they belonged to something structured and intentional. And yet, no ship should have been out there. Not at that time of night, and not without making a sound or showing any clear form. As the Fort Salisbury moved closer, a large shape began to emerge from the darkness. Witnesses later said it looked even darker than the ocean itself, a form far too wide and heavy to be mistaken for floating wood or the remains of a wrecked ship. The feeling was instant. Something huge was lying directly in the ship's way. More details started to become visible. Some men noticed faint ridges across its back, as if the surface was not smooth but had a patterned texture. Others said there were lines that looked like scales, giving the mass an uneven, rough look. A few even believed they saw shapes like fins running along the sides. But for many of those watching, all these small clues pointed to just one thought: it was massive. A dark shape stretched over the water, unmoving and silent. For a few seconds, the officers believed a crash was unavoidable. The shape only seemed to grow larger as the ship moved ahead. The steady lights still shone, low and quiet. They did not reflect on the surface and gave no answers for what they really were. Everyone on the bridge prepared for a possible hit. The order was given to stay ready. Then, without warning, the dark form began to sink. It did not kick or thrash like a whale. It did not twist in the water like a huge fish, and it did not dive quickly like a group of dolphins. Its movement was slow, controlled, and steady, like it was sinking on purpose, not acting on instinct, but on some kind of decision. The two lights sank with it. For a few seconds, they stayed dim beneath the water, still holding the same distance apart as before. Then, one by one, they faded from view. And just like that, they were gone. Within moments, the sea was calm again. The horizon was clear. The water was still, as though nothing had ever passed through it. The men standing watch remained silent, their eyes locked on the black surface. They waited for something, a return, a wave, a movement, any small sign of life. But nothing came. The sea remained still. The massive form, whatever it had been, did not reappear. The Fort Salisbury moved ahead, her engine steady, her direction unchanged. But the memory of what had just happened stayed with the crew. They had seen something enormous. They had watched it sink, and then it was simply gone. When calm settled back on the bridge, the officer on watch recorded the event in the ship's log. He chose his words with great care. The report was not dramatic. It held no guesses, and it offered no reason. It listed only what mattered: the two steady lights seen ahead, the huge shape that seemed to block the ship's way, the possible ridges or fins, and the slow, planned descent into the dark water. Later on, when the story began to spread beyond the ship itself, the captain took responsibility. He confirmed his crew had reported exactly what they believed they had witnessed. No facts had been stretched. Nothing had been imagined. The report written into the logbook was true to the moment, simple and clear. And yet, many questions remained, none of which had clear answers. The idea of a living creature made little sense. No known whale carried two lights that stayed solid, and no fish ever held a glowing position with such perfect stillness. Even the thought of a creature from the deep ocean did not explain the symmetry of the lights or the calm, smooth movement of something so massive across the water. But thinking it was some kind of ship made just as little sense. In the year 1902, submarines were still basic and small. They were experimental at best, limited in what they could do. No country in the world possessed a machine large enough to match what the crew described that night. and none had the silent ability to slip under the sea so quietly, leaving behind no ripple, no trace, no noise at all. Fort Salisbury continued on its way. The sea behind her closed in, peaceful and normal once more. But for the men on duty that night, the memory did not fade. They could still see those two lights floating on the Atlantic. They could still picture the massive dark form, long enough to block a steamship's path. They recalled its careful, slow dive into shadow, and then just emptiness. Their words are still written in the ship's log today, simple and truthful. It reads almost as if even the officers had no better way to describe what they saw. They wrote only what lay before their eyes: the lights, the shape, the movement. The quiet vanished. Whatever passed beneath Fort Salisbury that night in September was never explained. And now, even over 100 years later, the report is still the same. It was a calm report of something massive and unexplained moving through the ocean in a place where no known ship should have been. Years later, under the ice, using cameras and sonar, another crew would record something just as strange. In 1964, the United States Navy ship Alanin was on a scientific mission far from any coastline. Originally a freighter, the vessel had been changed into a research ship equipped with tools for deep-sea exploration. It carried sonar systems, magnetometers, and cameras that could be lowered thousands of meters into the darkness. On August 29, 1964, the Alanin was operating near the coast of Chile. The task that day was simple in its details, but large in its goal. The mission was to lower camera equipment into the ocean more than 2,500 meters deep and capture images of the seafloor. The job moved forward step by step. Heavy cables were lowered from the deck and sank steadily into the water. The cameras dropped slowly into the cold, black deep, disappearing from view as they moved into a place filled with pressure and total darkness. Many hours later, the team recovered the gear. Rolls of film were taken below deck to be developed, as had been done many times before on earlier trips. Most of the photographs showed what the team expected: thick layers of sediment covering the bottom, scattered rocks with jagged shapes, shadows of unusual sea creatures shaped by a world where light did not reach. It was all familiar, but one photo was different. It showed something rising straight up from the ocean floor. It was not broken or fallen over. Instead, it stood upright, as if it had been placed there and fixed in position. At the top, it spread out to the sides. The shape was strange because it was so balanced. A central column rose clean and tall. From it, other parts extended outward in equal directions. The whole outline did not look like something formed by nature. It looked built, like the mast of a machine or tool, placed with purpose on the bottom of the sea. In the sharp black and white of the photo, there was nothing casual about its presence. It did not appear to be junk. It did not seem to be debris. It seemed intentional. The photo was closely studied by the team on board. Everyone who viewed the image agreed. It did not look like the usual coral shapes or sponge forms that were often captured in deep-sea photographs. This was something else entirely. The structure was clear, upright, and alone in its surroundings. Its shape felt too exact, too intentional. It seemed as though it had been placed there on purpose, like something quietly planted in the deep, left in the shadows, and waiting. The image did not stay aboard the ship. It was brought to shore, copied, and passed around. Eventually, it made its way into newspapers, where it was named simply the Eltonin antenna. Readers who came across the strange picture studied its bold and unusual shape. Sitting against the empty seafloor, it appeared less like a natural form and more like a device, less like biology and more like technology. The story quickly spread, and with it, so did the photograph. It became one of the rare moments when the ocean's mystery was so directly captured on film. To the crew of the Alanin, it was just another entry. It was logged and filed away like any other sample they had collected. Just one picture among thousands taken during many research missions. But to those who came across it later, the image meant more. It was not like a moment seen and forgotten by the human eye. This was a piece of physical evidence. A strip of film showing something that had stood upright more than 2.5 kilometers beneath the sea, in a location where no known structure was supposed to exist. The photograph brought up questions that no one could easily answer. What exactly stood on the ocean floor? How could something with such perfect shape exist in the crushing pressure of the deep? And why was it there alone, so clearly separate from anything surrounding it? No solid answers ever came. Years passed. Still, the image kept people thinking. It was printed in books. It was shared in reports. It appeared in journals again and again, always showing the same strange shape with its upright stem, evenly spaced crossbars, and the strong suggestion that it had been placed, not naturally formed. Its mystery lasted, mainly because no other structure like it has ever been found. No confirmed explanation has ever been given. In the world of mysterious photographs, the Eltonin image remains unique. It was not someone's guess. It was not an illusion or rumor. It came from research equipment sent into the deep, recording without any bias, intention, or emotion. The frame, in simple black and white, told its own quiet story. Even now, more than 60 years later, it has not been forgotten. It is still studied, still debated, still shared across the world, and it still carries the same quiet, disturbing feeling. The deep sea keeps its secrets well. But for a moment in 1964, it seemed as if one of them had been revealed. The Alanin continued her journey, mapping and surveying the Pacific Ocean. The crew moved on to the next mission, but the photograph remained behind. It has lasted as one of the ocean's most haunting puzzles, an image of something standing where nothing like it should exist, clear, unexplained, and still waiting for an answer. Not long after, the ship's equipment detected something even more unusual. Not an object this time, but a sign of movement itself. In the late 1960s, the United States was increasing its activity in one of the most extreme regions on Earth, Antarctica. This effort was known as Operation Deep Freeze, a series of missions that combined scientific research with United States Navy operations in the frozen South. At its heart, Deep Freeze focused on transportation, building infrastructure, and helping supply remote research stations. But alongside the basics of support and construction, the work also made use of advanced naval equipment, ships outfitted with sonar, radar, and tools to map the sea hidden beneath Antarctic ice. It was during one such mission in 1968 that something strange was recorded. Unlike stories based only on human memory, this one began with machines, sonar technology, designed to detect and report what lay below. What these systems picked up was something that should not have been there. The waters around Antarctica were harsh and dangerous. Ships moved carefully between drifting sheets of ice, their hulls pushing against freezing conditions. Even the toughest vessels had to deal with major dangers, sudden shifts in ice, hidden ridgelines, and weather that changed without warning. That year, a ship, though there is debate over whether it was the icebreaker Glacier or one of the other support ships, was given a task to map a stretch of seafloor. At regular intervals, sonar was used to scan the underwater terrain, painting a picture of what rested miles below the surface. Usually, the scans showed what was expected: sloping ocean beds, deep trenches, sharp, jagged rises. All of it came through in the familiar fuzzy texture of sonar images. But during one run, the result was different. The sonar screen displayed a contact of massive size. The crew at the console watched, surprised, as the sonar return filled the screen, larger and clearer than anything they had seen before. This was not ice. Ice had a broken, uneven appearance. It did not match this pattern. This shape was solid. It was wide. And strangely, it was nearly symmetrical. What showed on the screen seemed to rise straight from the ocean floor around 2,000 meters deep. At first, the team guessed it could be an error, a glitch, or a false return. But scan after scan confirmed that the signal was real. Each sonar pulse bounced back the same way. It was a giant form where there should have been nothing. Later, some of the people who reviewed the return said the image looked like something artificial. Its edges appeared too smooth. Its layout is too balanced. Some wondered if it could be a sunken ship, but the object was far too massive for any known vessel. The contact appeared to stretch across hundreds of meters, with outlines that stood out sharply from the natural formations below. The team marked the signal, and word was sent to the ship's officers. For several long minutes, the entire crew stared at the echo as it held in place on screen. It did not drift. It did not change. Then, just as suddenly as it had first appeared, it was gone. The next sonar pass returned nothing. The seafloor was back to being empty, blank, cold, without features. Its disappearance made no sense. Something that large could not simply vanish beneath the waves. Icebergs move, but not at such deep levels. They float near the surface. Geological formations do not drift. A ridge or rise in the earth cannot just slide away without a trace. And yet, the sonar signal had disappeared. Some considered the idea of a malfunction, but the sonar worked properly before and after the reading. The equipment appeared to be functioning normally. Others guessed it might have been a living mass, like a large school of sea creatures. But sonar readings from biological life tend to be scattered and irregular. What they had seen was too sharp, too exact. The signals did not suggest a group of animals. They described a single structure, a complete object, and it was gone. Inside the sonar room, the crew kept their voices quiet. A few believed they had discovered a hidden seamount, a rise that earlier surveys had somehow missed, but others were not convinced. Some thought it might be a shipwreck, while a few even wondered if it could have been something alive. There was no agreement, but a heavy feeling remained. No one forgot how it had looked. The ship's log had to include the incident. Rules required that the log stay factual, with no guesses or opinions. The officer in charge wrote it plainly. An unidentified sonar contact of unusual size detected at depth, present for several sweeps, and then gone. No ideas were included, no suggestions were made, only the facts were recorded. But for those who had witnessed it, the moment was not so simple to forget. That night, gathered in the mess hall, the conversation circled back to what they had seen. Some admitted they had felt uncomfortable watching the shape hold steady on the sonar screen, as large as anything they had ever observed. Others said its sudden disappearance felt worse than when it had first appeared, as if something had moved away on purpose, slipping back into the dark. When the mission ended and the ship returned to port, the sonar tapes and records went with the rest of the mission data. Like everything from Operation Deep Freeze, it was placed into Navy archives. And there it stayed. But for the people who had been there, the memory remained. Years later, when asked about their time working around Antarctica, they spoke about the storms, the freezing cold, and the endless night skies. But whenever someone asked about strange events, their minds always went back to what had happened in 1968. They remembered how the machines had shown something massive, something that was simply not supposed to be down there. And they remembered when it vanished, leaving nothing but the sound of silence. The ship moved on. The dark Antarctic waters closed in again, and what had appeared clear and steady on the sonar screen slipped into mystery, unseen, unanswered, and unresolved. Far away from the icy south, in smaller and calmer waters, something new began to unfold in a Norwegian fjord. It started with the fishermen. They had set out their nets the usual way, but they came back in strange condition, torn apart or pulled with a strength unlike anything they had known before. On more than one trip, fishing boats were hit from below. The jolt shook people on deck and left them looking around, confused and unsettled. Ripples spread across still water, but without any clear cause. The movement spread in straight lines, suggesting something large was moving down below. Soon, others began adding to the story. Hunters passing through the area in small boats reported feeling deep vibrations coming up through the bottoms of their vessels. It was not like the familiar sounds made by whales or porpoises, sounds they all knew well. It was different. It was lower, constant, and weighted. A slow rhythm that seemed to rise through both wood and water. It was not just heard, it felt. The pulse was deep and regular, as if something below was sending it on purpose. Word of these strange events traveled fast. Fishermen told their neighbors what they had seen and felt. Hunters added what they had experienced. Each person's story added to the growing mystery. The accounts varied in their smaller details, but all described the same idea. The fjord seemed to hold something large and unknown beneath its surface, and it was enough to bring serious attention. At first, it was the hunters who responded. They launched their skiffs armed with rifles and harpoons. They moved through the waters as if tracking a great animal, circling locations where strange events had been reported. Nets were cast repeatedly in hopes of catching whatever it was that moved in the depths. As more reports came in, more boats joined the effort. Fishing vessels that usually spent their days gathering catch now shifted their focus to searching. The operation grew larger, and before long it was no longer just a local effort. The Norwegian Navy eventually sent ships to support the search. By the middle of summer, the fjord had become crowded in an unusual way. Small boats slipped in and out between larger ships, running search routes and watching the water carefully for even the smallest sign. At night, beams of light swept across the surface, and men stood ready with rifles. The fjord, usually quiet apart from the sounds of nets being pulled in or oars cutting water, had changed. It had become the scene of an all-out search. Records from this time continued to build, but none of them led to a clear answer. Nets were torn again and again, sometimes shredded, as if something had ripped through them with great force from below. Ripples appeared on open water even when there were no boats nearby, spreading into waves before slowly returning back to calm. On at least one occasion, hunters claimed to see a large, dark shape rolling just beneath the surface. It looked smooth and wide, and its movement was unlike anything they had seen from the whales or fish local to the area. The feeling was clear. This was something heavy, something that moved with calm purpose. What many people noticed most was that whatever it was seemed to respond to being followed. Boats trying to close in found the disturbance always moving farther away, never quite within reach. When engines were turned off and boats tried silently drifting in closer, the fjord went still. Then, just when the men started to lower their guard, the water would break once more at a different spot, bubbles rising and splashes forming, as if the presence had quietly shifted position. The Navy made use of their equipment. Sonar was deployed in an attempt to track what could not be seen. But the fjord's steep cliffs and rocky walls made sonar scanning extremely difficult. The echoes bounced and scattered the signals, complicating the readings. Still, several sonar technicians reported tracking a large, steady object in the water. It appeared solid. Its movement suggested control, and it maintained its shape longer than any group of sea creatures possibly could. But every time the ships tried to lock onto the contact, it disappeared again. All attempts to locate or trap the presence failed. Nets were stretched across narrow points in the fjord, only to return in ruined pieces. Boats positioned themselves to block possible exits, but wakes would appear in other spots, as if the object had moved through a space no one had watched. Gunfire was shot into the water more than once. Harpoons were thrown, but no hits were ever confirmed. No remains were found. The search went on for weeks. Through the end of summer, men watched and waited. But over time, fuel supplies began to run low. Nets were used, torn, repaired, and ruined again. Patience wore down. Little by little, the search came to an end. The Navy removed its ships. The hunters and fishermen returned to their everyday work. By the time autumn arrived, the fjord had returned to its quiet state. The water lay still. The strange events had stopped, and nothing further was seen. No answers were found. No wreckage was recovered. No animal was ever captured. No physical proof surfaced to explain what had disturbed the fjord that summer. All that remained were the memories and the stories from those who had been part of the search. Fishermen spoke of nets dragged with a power unlike anything they had experienced before. Hunters repeated their descriptions of a dark, smooth shape just beneath the surface. Navy sonar technicians recalled tracking contacts that were too massive to ignore, yet impossible to properly identify. The explanations varied. Some firmly believed it had been a living creature, something unknown to science. Others suggested it might have been a submarine violating Norwegian waters. But no nation ever confirmed the use or presence of such a craft. In the end, no official explanation was ever offered. The incident was marked as unresolved. Slowly, the fjord returned to its natural pace. Fishing boats came and went. Hunters traveled along familiar routes. The waters remained still once more. Yet for those who had witnessed those weeks, the summer of 1972 did not blend into the rest. It remained a season remembered, a time when something enormous, unaccounted for, had traveled beneath the surface. Something present, something followed, but never caught. Beyond the military, similar patterns were seen elsewhere, farther from the spotlight. In quiet places along rivers, oceans, and coasts, the only observers were regular people, those whose everyday work was tied to the water. On the evening of October 11th, 1973, two men headed out to fish near the banks of the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. Charles Hickson, age 42, worked at a nearby shipyard. Calvin Parker, age 19, had only recently joined the same job as a welder. That evening, they brought fishing rods and a cooler, expecting nothing more than peaceful time by the river. The sun had already set, and the light was almost gone. Across the water, shadows covered marsh grass and scattered trees. The two men sat quietly near an abandoned shipyard site, casting out their lines with little conversation. That was when Parker noticed a strange glow reflecting on the water. At first, he assumed it was a boat's lights, but the shape looked wrong. Hickson also looked up. Floating silently down from above, a glowing oval shape began to approach. It was completely quiet as it descended and came to a stop just above the riverbank. The men would later describe the object as metallic, nearly 30 feet wide and softly glowing from within. A bright blue light then spilled out, covering both of them. Before either man could react, a hatch on the object opened, and from inside, three figures emerged. They did not appear to walk. Instead, they seemed to glide. Hickson remembered their movement as smooth, controlled, and without the usual motion that came with taking steps. The beings were not like any humans he had ever seen. Each one stood around 5 feet tall, with gray, wrinkled skin and long arms. Their heads were nearly blank, with no visible eyes or ears, only a single thin slit where a mouth might have been. At the end of each arm were claw-like hands, sharp in shape. When the men tried to escape, the blue light surrounding them stopped them. Parker froze in place. Hickson felt himself lifted up, taken right off the ground. Two of the beings grabbed him under his arms and carried him toward the craft. Parker, even though he struggled to break free, was also taken. According to Hickson, once inside, he was placed in a bright white room. A machine shaped like a large eye floated near him and silently moved around his body, scanning him. He could not move, but was fully awake and aware of everything. The beings made no sounds, no words, no reaction. Parker, in his personal account, described a similar experience. He was also examined by a device that hovered around his head. After that, he could no longer measure the passage of time. His next clear memory was standing back on the riverbank. When the men regained full awareness, the strange object was still close by. The beings let them go. They turned and glided back into the craft. Within moments, the object rose silently into the air and disappeared into the night sky. There was a long pause. Neither man spoke. Hickson was frightened, but still calm enough to suggest they should report what had just happened. Parker, in shock and trembling, only wanted to go straight home. But Hickson was decided. They drove directly to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. There, they shared their story with Sheriff Fred Diamond and Captain Glenn Ryder. At first, the officers were unsure what to think. The story was strange, but they let the two men tell it just the same. To test how truthful they were, the deputies left both men alone in a room that had a hidden audio recorder. They expected to capture the men planning their story or making things up, but that did not happen. The private recording picked up only stress, fear, and confusion. Hickson kept trying to calm Parker, who repeated that he wished he could forget everything that had happened. Neither man spoke like someone making up a lie. The sheriff's office soon contacted other officials. Because the location was on a waterway, the United States Coast Guard was informed. Agents from nearby military locations came to speak with the two men directly. Reports were written, and both Hickson and Parker gave full sworn statements. News of the event began to spread quickly, but in the beginning the concerns were focused on something else: whether an unknown object had entered controlled airspace or navigable waters. The Coast Guard sent out patrol boats along the Pascagoula River and into nearby bays, searching for strange activity. Nothing unusual was found. In the days that followed, both men received medical examinations. Hickson agreed to undergo questioning under hypnosis. During that session, he repeated the same story, being taken aboard the craft and examined. Parker refused to do hypnosis, stating that the memory was too much for him emotionally. At the sheriff's office, the case file grew thick. It now included recorded statements, sketches, the hidden audio, and medical findings. The Coast Guard also added its own patrol logs, confirming that their sweeps had found nothing. Together, all of these documents created one of the most detailed and consistent reports of any civilian encounter up to that time. Even weeks later, when asked again, Hickson told the same story, word by word. Parker, though he remained quiet in public, still confirmed all the events the same way. Neither of the men wanted attention. Hickson explained that his only reason for going to the sheriff's office was because of how serious and disturbing the experience had been, and how real it still felt to them both. No physical evidence was ever discovered along the riverbank. The ground showed no signs of a landing. The water held no strange residue. The only remaining record existed in the witnesses' own statements and in the official files created after that October night. Years later, copies of the sheriff's hidden recording made their way to the public. The tape still carried the unfiltered voices of the two fishermen, calm and steady in Hickson's case, anxious and nearly breaking in Parker's. The Coast Guard logs remained as well. They listed each patrol up the Pascagoula Channel, each report ending the same way: no contact. What took place on the banks of the Pascagoula River was never explained. Two men had gone out for a quiet evening of fishing. Both came back changed, insisting they had been taken aboard a craft unlike anything from this earth. Their account was documented immediately. Their fear was captured on tape, and their case was handled by both local police and the United States Coast Guard. After that, the river returned to normal. Fishing boats passed once more. Barges and small boats moved back and forth beneath the bridges as they had before. But inside the files of Jackson County and the United States Coast Guard, the record of what happened in October 1973 was never closed. It remained logged and saved. a civilian case that drew attention from law enforcement and military teams alike. Well beyond the Gulf region, another body of water, an inland lake, would produce a report that seemed even more unusual. Lake Baikal, located in southern Siberia, is the deepest freshwater lake in the world. Its depth reaches more than a mile in places. Its water is clear, cold, and massive in scale. By the early 1980s, Soviet naval forces had made it a regular site for specialized training, testing dive suits, practicing endurance missions, and running under-ice operations. From one of these drills came a report almost unlike anything else kept in government records. During a routine training mission, a dive team went down into the deep waters of Lake Baikal. The divers were equipped with standard suits, oxygen tanks, and radio communications. Everything began normally. Dim light came from above. Columns of rising bubbles surrounded them, and the rocky underwater landscape dropped away beneath their fins. Then, something unexpected happened. The men began reporting shapes nearby, moving through the water around them. At first, they believed it might be another Soviet dive team training in the same area. However, as the figures approached, their appearance became more visible. They were not fellow soldiers. The divers described tall, human-like forms, nearly 3 meters in height, moving with ease through the water. There were no visible tanks, no standard diving or breathing equipment. Instead, the beings appeared to be wearing tight, pale suits. Their heads were covered in smooth, rounded helmets with no clear facial features. At minimum, 3 of these figures were observed. They did not approach quickly and did not attempt to leave. They simply hovered off in the distance, slowly drifting in the water, still, calm, and seemingly comfortable at a depth that challenged even trained military divers. The divers made an attempt to approach. They were given orders to try and capture one of the beings using nets. That action ended the encounter. The figures suddenly accelerated away, moving across the water with no visible sign of propulsion, covering distance far faster than any human could manage underwater. The Soviet divers gave chase, pushing well past their safety limits. Several of them made emergency ascents, rising far too quickly from depth without following correct procedures. 3 of the divers developed severe cases of decompression sickness. Emergency help was rushed, but despite treatment, not all of them survived. The official explanation labeled the incident a training accident, but those who had been there told a different story. They remembered the sighting of the tall, humanoid figures just before the rapid ascents. In private reports, the surviving divers described how the beings had moved. One said it looked exactly like walking through open air, unhurried at first, but able to move with incredible speed once they felt threatened. Another described how the creatures' pale coverings gave off a faint glow. The filtered light in Lake Baikal made them easy to spot, even as they retreated into darker waters. Though the observations were short, they stayed with the men, a moment of clear recognition before everything turned to panic and emergency. But this was not the end of the sightings. Over the years that followed, strange underwater lights were noted again and again. Soviet divers and even local fishermen recorded seeing glowing spheres deep under the surface, lights that slowly rose up, hovered beneath thick ice, and then vanished without warning. Naval patrols recorded sonar hits that seemed too large and steady to be ordinary fish, but every time they attempted to track them, the signals broke off too quickly to follow. In at least one case, a patrol boat documented a sonar contact the size of a small submarine. The object stayed still for a period at great depth. Then, without warning, it shot upward. It disappeared from the sonar screens entirely, and the ship's crew saw no movement at the surface. To them, it seemed to be something that operated beyond the limits of any known submersible or vehicle. Together, the diver incident and these later reports gave Lake Baikal a unique reputation in classified Soviet files as a location where unknown underwater phenomena occurred. No physical object was ever found. The reports lived only through the words of those who gave them. After the fall of the Soviet Union, parts of these stories began to spread more freely. The core remained the same: trained military divers, sightings of humanoid beings, a failed capture attempt, and serious consequences that followed. What sets the Lake Baikal case apart is the number of different sources involved: divers, sonar operators, naval patrol crews, and civilian fishermen, all reporting strange activity in the same region during the same period. Their stories were not exact in every detail, but the pattern stayed consistent. Beings or objects moving freely at depths where human limits fail. The Lake Baikal case still stands out because of who filed the reports. These were career military personnel, working under strict training and observation. The descriptions given of beings moving freely at great depth, untouched by pressure and not needing any breathing equipment, still have no accepted explanation. In the years that followed, sightings of glowing underwater lights and large sonar contacts continued, but none quite matched the strange, direct experience described by those divers. Back in the Pacific Ocean, the mystery of deep-sea phenomena returned once more. This time, it was not part of a military drill or a coastal search. It involved an active working fishing fleet operating far offshore. In 1995, a group of commercial tuna fishing boats were working near the San Juan Seamount, roughly 150 miles west of California. One night broke from routine in a way so unusual that the memory remained strong even years later. The San Juan Seamount is a wide undersea mountain. Its top lies deep underwater, but it rises high enough to attract large schools of fish. Tuna fleets usually worked in its surrounding currents for days at a time, casting nets, dropping long lines, and carefully tracking fish movements. The nights followed a familiar pattern: bright deck lights, rotating shifts, nets hauled in, men resting when possible. But then, something changed. That night, several vessels reported that the ocean beneath them had lit up. Crews said the light did not resemble the soft glow of disturbed plankton or surface reflections. This was brighter, wider. It looked like a giant light switch had been turned on beneath their feet. One captain explained that the glow was powerful enough that his boat's hull cast a shadow upward, just as it would have during daylight hours. But it was night, and the light was coming from below. Fishermen agreed. It was not from a fixed point. The glow moved in large, sweeping arcs beneath the entire fleet. It changed colors slowly, shifting between soft white and amber before switching back again. It gave the strong impression of great size. Not a single light, not one object, but something vast beneath the waves. Some compared it to looking into a lit swimming pool at night, except the pool was the open Pacific Ocean, and the light stretched for hundreds of meters underwater. Several ships changed their route. Some moved to avoid the glow, others moved closer, trying to follow it. Fishermen leaned over railings, watching the surface, looking for any cause. Ripples began forming where no boats moved, spreading in wide circular motions as if something had turned or spun beneath the water. Nets dropped into the glowing area came back empty. However, a few crews said their gear was pulled or tangled up, as if hitting something solid that was moving below. Word of the event traveled quickly by radio across the fishing fleet. By the end of the night, at least 6 boats had logged sightings. They recorded the time and their locations. Some fishermen said they watched the light rising, glowing closer to the surface. The brightness was strong enough to see fish scattering in all directions. Others shared that the light appeared to follow the ridge of the seamount, almost as if something had been moving along its crest. When the light eventually pulled away, several of the boats tried chasing it. Engines started. Spotlights swept open water. But every time the glowing area faded slowly into darkness until it was simply gone. A few hours passed, then it returned, this time in a completely different part of the fleet's working zone. Fishermen were used to difficult nights. Long trips were not rare, but this night was different. They knew the importance of documenting the strange. Multiple captains filled out detailed incident reports, not just for their own records, but for their companies and for the United States Coast Guard as well. Each one explained what they had witnessed, noting the event clearly for safety reasons. The concern was clear. If a submarine or large underwater craft had been moving that close to the fishing nets, then the danger of either a collision or tangled gear was very real. The United States Coast Guard review teams checked the reported coordinates carefully. They confirmed that no United States Navy operations had been scheduled in that area during the time of the event. A few weeks later, patrol vessels launching from ports in California reported strange surface activity in the same general area. Ripples were observed moving across calm water, though the glowing light previously reported by the fishermen was no longer seen. No additional details were added to the official record. What makes the San Juan Seamount case stand out is the scale of the event. This was not a single person reporting something strange at sea. It was multiple working boats, all crewed by experienced men. Men who knew how light behaves on the ocean and who understood what normal looked like out there. And their reports matched with precision. They spoke of a wide glow moving beneath the full fleet. It was so strong, it made the Pacific Ocean look like a sheet of glass with lights shining from below. One captain used those very words. Not one piece of debris was recovered. No photograph was taken, and no clear or official explanation followed. Some among the crew speculated that it may have been some kind of advanced military craft equipped with powerful lighting systems. Others firmly disagreed. They explained that the glow was far too big, too even, and too consistent to be from any existing underwater lighting they had seen, even compared to military equipment. Add to that the fact that the Navy specifically denied being in the area that evening, and the mystery deepened. In the end, the event went unproven, unexplained, but for the fishermen who had been there, the night left a clear mark. In the middle of ordinary fishing hours, the seamount had turned into a place of something unknown. Appearing only in light, it revealed itself beneath the black waves without a sound.